On your Friday episode of Locked On Raptors, what are the two biggest transactions of the week around the NBA mean for Toronto? Maybe kind of a lot. Plus, Bronny James, anyone?
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? And welcome to another episode of Locked On Raptors, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Friday, June the 21st, and I'm your host, Sean Woodley. I've been covering the Toronto Raptors now for 10 seasons on various platforms. I'm very old. Of course, you can find me over on the Hell website at Woodley Sean. You can find the show on Instagram at Locked On Raptors, and you can join us in the Locked On Raptors Discord server. The link is in the description of the podcast. It's free to join. Come be part of our growing listener family on draft night. I'll be in there, do a little voice chat as the draft unfolds. It should be lots of fun. So come and join us in our Locked On Raptors Discord community, a great place for all to come and hang. Of course, you can find the show for free wherever you get your podcast. Follow, subscribe, rate, review, tell a friend. Much appreciated when you support the show. When you support the show on the audio side of things, you can also find us on YouTube if you want to see the video and look at my mug every day. You can go subscribe to the Locked On Raptors YouTube channel. Hit the notification bell while you're there, and you will get a push notification every single time the show is about to go live or premiere on the tube. All right, let's get to it. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks, the easiest, most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedInNBA to use the code all lowercase LockedInNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. And with that, we're off and rolling here on your Friday episode. A bit of a news roundup day. You know, the Raptors not super in the conversation on the rumor mill just yet, although they were mentioned by Jake Fischer in his column today regarding one Patrick Williams. We'll talk about that coming up and the whole Bulls situation in relation to the truly perplexingly idiotic Alex Caruso for Josh Giddey straight up trade. Boy, oh boy, poor Bulls fans, man. But maybe we can make Bulls fans even sadder by poaching more of their good players away for piddly returns. So we'll get into that. I also want to talk about Bronny James, who the Raptors were mentioned as like one of the teams in passing by Jonathan Givony this week on ESPN, kind of digging into teams that, you know, could in theory go and jump at Bronny James in the draft. And Masai Ujiri mentioned as a guy who likes Bronny and could take Bronny without even having him in for a workout at 31. That I think engendered some reaction. And I do think the conversation about Bronny James is frankly like pretty dumb and either black or white. We're going to try to sort through the noise that is accompanying Bronny James everywhere he goes and actually try to just talk about what a prospect he is and what's good, what's bad about his game. We'll do that coming up a little bit later on. But off the top, biggest news in the NBA this week, I think, at least when it comes to the free agent happenings around the league, Malik Monk, I guess JJ Redick's the bigger story. But as far as the Raptors' interest, Malik Monk signs with the Sacramento Kings for 4 years, $78 million to stay with the Kings. And this one, bit of a surprise. Basically, the way the cap functions and the way Malik Monk's contract was situated, this was kind of all the Kings could do to keep him. There was seemingly a much higher payday for him out there in free agency with not a ton of teams, a good handful of teams with cap space, and a few of those teams really needing a guy like Malik Monk. I think, for example, of the Orlando Magic as sort of the key example that would have been a perfect Malik Monk team. But with the market being what it was, I guess Malik Monk figured, hey, I'll take a pay cut to stay in a place I'm happy. He's talked a lot about loving being in Sacramento. He obviously chose Sacramento after being with the Lakers when he got paid last time, just because he wanted to play with his pal, De'Aaron Fox. So, power to him. That's awesome. Glad Malik Monk is happy. But I do think this has a couple of ripple effects to the Toronto Raptors, both for their offseason plans, with free agency and the cap space route, if they so choose to take it, which seems less and less likely by the day, and made more so unlikely by this signing. But there's also a connection to Gary Trent Jr. as well. I think let's start with the cap space thing. The cap space route for the Raptors, where they, decline Bruce Brown's option, renounce Gary Trent Jr.'s bird rights and cap hold, and just go into the summer with $29 million in cap space. That always felt like a pretty far-fetched avenue for accruing talent, for getting an upgrade on this team, just because there's not a whole lot of free agents out there. And odds are you're not going to win the musical chairs game when it comes to free agency and the high price guys, especially when you're the Raptors and you're not like a contender, right? Some teams can sell Malik Monk or any of these other free agents on jumping into a competitive situation. I think the Raptors are a little closer than a lot of people seem to think they are. But I think in general, the Magic are by definition closer to competing and would be, presumably taken over the top a little bit by the addition of a guy like Malik Monk to offer some extra creation and guard play, which they so badly need. Just the Raptors are not in a spot competitively where they're going to be able to make the best pitch. And unless they're throwing a whole bunch of irresponsible money at guys, the very best free agents in the market are probably going to go to more competitive, ready teams. And so that has always felt like a bit of an inhibitor to the Raptors going out and, playing at the top of the free agent market. Malik Monk near the top of the free agent market. I think probably the best free agent in the non-max player or near max player division. I guess OG Anunoby falls into this bucket as well, although he might get a max on account of all the leverage he has over the New York Knicks and the threat of the Sixers lurking out there and the Thunder lurking out there and all of that. But either way, I think with Malik Monk being off the board, it really, to me, makes the cap space route for the Raptors probably the least sexy option this summer. And I thought it was the least sexy option anyway, kind of from the jump, Malik Monk even included, as much of a talent upgrade as he would have been. The fit would have been a little bit tricky. You're probably never, ever defending anybody at better than a 25th in the league level or anything like that with Malik Monk, Quickly, Barrett, Barnes, and Pirtle as your core five. But as a pure talent addition, I could have been talked into it. Now I just don't quite see the ways in which they can go use that cap space. We'll talk about, I think, maybe the one last potential option for the Raptors with cap space coming up in segment 2 when we get to Patrick Williams. But there's also a connection here to Gary Trent Jr., which I think is pretty interesting. And I don't think it's just as simple as it might seem on the surface. Malik Monk signs for 4 years, $78 million. And I think the first response from a lot of people, this was the first response from a lot of people in the Locked On Raptors Discord server when the news came down was, oh, well, that set the market for these sort of guard types on the market. And therefore, no way Gary Trent Jr. is getting anything close to the sub $20 million a year annual salary that Malik Monk is going to pull in from the Sacramento Kings. And I just don't think it's that black and white necessarily. Look, Gary Trent Jr. is a worse player than Malik Monk. He should make less money than Malik Monk is making, even if Malik Monk took a pay cut from the Sacramento Kings. I think Malik Monk probably worth about $25 million in actuality. If he's making 19 and a half, like that's a good team-friendly contract for the Kings. And I don't think Gary Trent Jr. is worth $19.5 million to the Raptors or frankly any other team. But there is the possibility that without the availability of Malik Monk on the market, that Gary Trent Jr. becomes one of these guys who potentially goes and gets overpaid by a team that has money to burn and doesn't want to miss out on their next or third or fourth best option if options 1 and 2 or 3 are off the table. And so I could see a team like the Magic, if they don't go now and sign Klay Thompson or Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, saying, hey, there's Gary Trent Jr. He shoots a lot of threes. He'd be helpful on this team for space. We have the defensive infrastructure with Jalen Suggs and Paolo Banchero and Wendell Carter Jr. to kind of insulate Gary Trent Jr. Maybe he's a guy who can take us over the top a little bit. Maybe we pay him a little extra money. Maybe we give him 2 years, $40 million through the vein of a Bruce Brown who got overpaid last summer by the Indiana Pacers, and everyone knew it. Like, maybe that is something the Magic go and do now to ensure they get some shooting help if their next couple best plans fall through, which, hey, free agency plans fall through all the time. Ask any team in the NBA. It's a difficult game to play. So I don't know if it necessarily means that Malik Monk's contract is just going to like set the market for these guard types and everyone is going to make less than that. Like, I would bet KCP is going to make more than Malik Monk. I would bet Klay Thompson probably ends up making more than Malik Monk. And Gary Trent Jr. very well could if some team gets brazen and has money to burn. And I think this is also, again, this is a cap related thing. That Malik Monk wasn't able to make more money than this from the Kings. And so and he obviously chose to stay in a place he was happy as opposed to going and pursuing the biggest possible bag he could have gotten somewhere on the open market. And look, maybe the reporting comes out that offer was never going to be there from the Magic, but just sort of logic says the Magic had a lot of cap space to burn. If they go and throw $25 million at Malik Monk, like, that's a pretty compelling offer. That should have been there probably, if he gets to free agency. I think he definitely took a pay cut to stay at a place he was happy, which again, power to him. That's awesome. I wish more players kind of did this sometimes, but if he's happy with the money he's making, it's still totally life-changing, future-changing money and all that stuff, then power to him taking a pay cut, even if the union might not be the most pleased. But because of the circumstance with the cap machinations and the reasons why he couldn't make more from the Kings, I don't know if that specific situation is going to go and set the market either, right? That's kind of a unique thing that I don't think goes and dictates what all these other sort of three-point shooting guard types are going to go and make on the market. All that said, I still think Gary Trent Jr., the most sensible thing here is for the Raptors to just retain him, especially considering the cap space avenue feels less and less likely to bear, great fruit this offseason. Of course, there is one exception who could, in theory, be a nice use of that cap space for the Raptors that would necessitate not bringing back Gary Trent Jr., that would necessitate declining Bruce Brown's contract and not trying to trade for him or trade him for something. And that is Patrick Williams, who is an RFA. We will get into the possibility of the Raptors going and pursuing him per Jake Fischer in a little throwaway line in his recent column over at Yahoo Sports. We'll get to that coming up. Today's show is brought to you by friends over at Prize Picks, the single best place to go and play daily fantasy sports. It's America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members for a reason. All you got to do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. You can get in on the daily action with your friends and become part of the Prize Picks community as well. Today, you can win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000. They got promotions all over the place, from lowering select players' projections on Tuesdays to help your lineup hit, or getting your entries fees back if you lose a lineup on a Friday, like today. Maybe you want to go play a Prize Picks entry for the Stanley Cup final tonight. You can go and do that and get your entry fee back if you have a losing lineup. That is a ton of fun. Again, there's all kinds of players and sports to go and play with. You can mismatch different sports as well. The WNBA season's rolling along. Maybe you want to get Caitlin Clark on a projection pick, as well as Brianna Stewart for a more on whatever point she's projected for in a given night. Go check it out. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. That's LOCKEDONNBA, the code on Prize Picks for a deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. Back at it here on your Friday edition of Locked On Raptors, talking about the news of the week around the league and its impact on the Toronto Raptors. Another big one yesterday, I mentioned it off the top, the Chicago Bulls doing some Bulls stuff, man, trading Alex Caruso, who seemed like one of the sexiest possible offseason additions for a contender out there. Perhaps could have, accrued a whole bunch of picks in return. Instead, they just get Josh Giddey from the Thunder and nothing else. And maybe your mileage varies on Josh Giddey, but I think Josh Giddey is not a very good basketball player. And I think the fact that he's been playing on a very good team that has kind of hidden some of his foibles is like, it's only going to be even worse when you put the ball in the hands of a guy who doesn't have a whole lot of self-creation ability, can't turn the corner on guys, not super, burstful with his first step or anything like that. And notably, cannot shoot threes from a stationary catch and shoot situation, let alone being a lead guard who has to pull up to shape the defense and the way teams are going to guard him. Man, oh man, what a stupid, stupid trade for the Bulls. The Thunder have all the picks of the world, and they couldn't even get one piddly little pick from Sam Presti, that little pick perv. Unbelievable stuff. Ridiculous. Anyway, the Bulls might be ripe for the picking, I guess, is the sort of end result here. Is you look at what they're doing, you look at the reports that they still want to keep DeMar DeRozan on that team, that they still have Zach LaVine, who it seems like they can't give away for anything. They've got the Nikola Vucevic contract. Like, I have no idea what the Bulls want to be. I don't think the Bulls have any idea of what they want to be. They're clearly a very dumb franchise doing very dumb things, and I don't know, maybe you should give him a call. Maybe you should try and go and poach the one potential player who I think will be worth using your cap space on in Patrick Williams, which doesn't even require a call necessarily, although a sign and trade could certainly go down there. But he's also just an RFA. You can go and drop an offer sheet, and maybe, just maybe, you catch the Bulls unaware, and maybe they're trying to, sort out the DeMar thing. Maybe they're worried about going into the tax for a team that stinks and they don't want to match. Like, I think Patrick Williams is someone who the Raptors should be at least calling the agent to inquire about an offer sheet, calling the Bulls to inquire about a sign and trade. And Jake Fischer noted in his column at Yahoo today that the Raptors and Hornets are among the teams that have been kind of linked to Patrick Williams in sign and trade situations. And so maybe we got to look at it more through the lens of a sign and trade and not just a straight up cap space signing, which would, of course, be interesting. Like if the Raptors were able to use Bruce Brown's contract, for example, as the returning salary in a sign and trade for Patrick Williams, where maybe you give Patrick Williams 4 years, $80 million or something like that. Maybe that's a way to maybe you have to sweeten it with a pick or something like that, which maybe at that point you don't do it. I don't know. It's tough to say. Again, it's the Bulls. Like, don't underestimate stupid. Maybe they're just down for Bruce Brown because he thinks that he helps their team win this season. And hey, he could. He's a useful player, but on the Bulls, maybe not so much. Either way, like I think it's worth at least exploring just how dumb the Bulls are, just how easily you could pry Patrick Williams away from the Bulls with an offer sheet or with a sign and trade situation. It just makes sense. I think Patrick Williams, okay, there's like a lot of risk with Patrick Williams, right? Like if you were to go and pay him a bag, you're paying for a guy who's been basically the same player for 4 seasons. 10 points a game, 4 boards, shoots 40% from 3. Pretty interesting. An assist and a half a game. Doesn't do a whole lot in terms of like massive production or counting stats or anything like that. His defensive stuff is kind of interesting. Per 36 minutes, 1.2 steals and a block this past season. So there's a little bit of like defensive counting stat production there too from Patrick Williams. He's a guy who I think fits the mold for the Raptors just because he's 6'9". He's defensively capable. He's tall. He shoots threes. Like, that's the kind of guy the Raptors should be trying to target. I would prefer a more established, like ready to go wing, but I think a bet on Patrick Williams being better away from Chicago than he was with Chicago is not the worst idea in the world. We've seen this movie before. Ask Larry Markkinen how his career after he left Chicago, right? Like, that's clearly a rudderless mess of a franchise, and I'm not surprised that Patrick Williams hasn't quite blossomed in his first 4 seasons while having to share the floor with a sort of more veteran-laden roster. Of course, he's had injury stuff. He's missed close to 2 full seasons. I guess he missed half of last season and nearly the full season in 21-22, but he's also played 82 games in a season. He played 71 in the COVID-y season in 2020-2021, where everyone seemed to miss time. So, like, there's... for Williams, like there's equal reason to feel good and bad about the idea of bringing him in. But I do think you got to go and check in with the Bulls, who are going through clearly some changes and some reevaluation of what they've got and a recentering of things around Josh Giddey, apparently, who per Woj has quote unquote all-star potential, which is the wildest agent speak I've ever seen put into a tweet in my entire life. Maybe they don't covet Patrick Williams as much as the Raptors might for their positional needs and the sort of things he would bring to the table. I think it's worth at least giving it a shot. And again, if your thinking is, the cap space route is still the thing here, you can still go and, throw a big chunk of your cap space if you go and create it by declining Bruce Brown and not retaining Gary Trent Jr. You can go and create that cap space and throw a big offer sheet his way as well. That's an option. I tend to think that one's tough, just like asset management wise, because you're losing 2 players, Bruce Brown and Gary Trent Jr., for basically nothing to go and bring in Patrick Williams, who may or may not be someone who changes your life. I think the risk with Patrick Williams makes that tricky. If he were more of a sure thing, A, he'd be less gettable probably, and B, I think you'd be more fine to sort of swapping out Trent and Bruce to bring him in. But there's a chance that Gary Trent Jr. and Bruce Brown, in the aggregate, whatever you can get from them on the floor or via trade in the next year and a half, or next year for Bruce Brown, I suppose. Yeah, a year. That's what we're at, about a year. I think that probably, that there's a chance that nets you more on court value overall than just having Patrick Williams on your team at maybe a bit of an inflated salary for what he's done in his career. It's a fascinating one. But I do think if you're looking at, we did this when we ran through all the names from the Bowl, right? A couple of weeks ago, we put a bunch of wing names in the Bowl and pulled them out, talking about his Raptors targets. Patrick Williams, one of the very few guys that I wasn't just like kind of, no thanks to instantly, right? I think there is something there, and he's the type of buy low, second drafty kind of guy who a team like the Raptors, who needs an infusion of talent, who need wings and large people, they should be all over that. I understand why the Raptors are being tossed around as a potential thing there. Obviously, like the Scotty Barnes Florida State connection is interesting as well. But overall, yeah, I think anything you can do, even just call the Bulls and say, hey, what about Ayo Dosunmu? Like, that'd be a nice guard for the Raptors to go and add. What does it take for Ayo? Is it like, can we get him for pick 31 and some salary going back the other way? Like, just how dumb are the Bulls? Don't underestimate stupid. Don't underestimate cheap. Just give them a call, see what's up. And maybe you can go and swindle them, much like Sam Presti just did by getting Alex Caruso for only Josh Giddey. There aren't that many dumb teams in the league. You got to go try to take advantage of them when you can. And hopefully the Raptors have left their phase, their little micro dalliance with being one of the dumber teams over the last year or so. Hopefully they've left that one behind. But either way, that's the kind of read here on the Bulls. Just give them a call. They're dumb. And lifeless and sad and directionless. And that might be something you can go and take advantage of if you are an opportunistic front office, as the Toronto Raptors fancy themselves to be. We'll come back on the other side and we will get into another guy who the Raptors were referenced in connection with this week by a major reporter, Jonathan Givony, talking about Bronny James and the Toronto Raptors. I don't know how much I put into this one. There's a lot of agent speak flying around with Bronny James, but I do want to try to cut through all of that and just talk about the player that Bronny James is or is not. We will do that to round out the show coming up in just one sec. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. And that's why you got to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn is not just another job board. No, LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. It gives you access to professionals you can't find anywhere else. And LinkedIn does all that while making the process easy and intuitive. Hiring is easy when you have so many quality candidates to choose from. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate for a job within 24 hours of posting it on the site. 2.5 million small businesses are using LinkedIn for hiring. You should be too. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedInNBA. That's linkedin.com/LockedInNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, rounding things out here before we get to Bronny James, just a reminder, Locked On Sports Today 24/7 is your all-day streaming channel for you to go and peruse anything you like from the world of sports. We got local hosts covering all of the biggest stories, the NBA draft, the NBA finals still, the Celtics and Mavericks and the wreckage, the parade, all that stuff. It's all there for you. Obviously, plenty of draft stuff in both the NBA and NHL coming up. Baseball, of course, moving along in the offseason too. Lots to go and peruse over at Locked On Sports Today 24/7. Put it on and leave it on all the live long day. All right, let's continue on here. Round it out with a look at Bronny James, the prospect. Look, like it feels like it's impossible to engage with the Bronny James thing normally for anyone who talks about Bronny James. It's kind of exhausting. And I want to try to just spend the next 10 minutes or so just trying to talk about the prospect that Bronny James is without all of the ancillary noise. And that's hard to do, right? Like, everything with Bronny James is, it's got a little bit of extra fuel to it because of the LeBron connection. And I think, there's always going to be that sort of thing in the back of your mind based on, I think, old reporting at this point that, you draft Bronny James and you just might have a chance to go get yourself LeBron James on your basketball team. I think we probably have to start by dispelling that notion for the Toronto Raptors. Jonathan Givony of ESPN mentioned this week the Raptors are a team that might consider Bronny at 31 with the first pick of the second round. And that does not mean they're going to go and sign LeBron this summer. LeBronto is not becoming a real positive thing. We're not reclaiming LeBronto in a different way. No, like, get that out of the way. All the reporting of late and the word from LeBron himself is that he's given up on the idea of playing with his son on the same team being like a must-have dream of his, and simply sharing the floor with him in a game would satisfy his familial ambitions in the NBA. This would be, purely about the prospect that Bronny James is if the Raptors were to take him, and I think it's worth talking about him. The opinions on Bronny James seem to be all over the place and seem to be informed by the noise and the fact that his name is LeBron James Jr., right? Like it's unavoidable. And I think the result of that really bad and dumb discourse has been, a lot of folks saying like, His name is only being mentioned because he's tied to LeBron. He's not a good prospect. He just has the name. Dismiss it entirely, the idea of taking him in the second round, even like this guy shouldn't be in the draft. He should have gone back to school, yada, yada, yada. I think that's sort of one school of this is just like the nepotism draft pick, and there's no reason to actually consider him as a real prospect. I think there's this other sort of contrarian side coming in now that's like, hold on a second. We could actually contort ourselves and talk ourselves into thinking Bronny James is actually a first round talent. And all of the noise is undercutting the fact that he's a real player hiding in plain sight. I think that's maybe a little too extreme as well. I do think, as is usually the case with these things, it falls somewhere in the middle with Bronny James as a prospect. And so I think we should probably try to assess what Bronny James is just as a prospect and not as a news cycle fodder piece. I think it's hard to judge anything he did at college this season with USC. Had the medical scare, obviously, nearly died in the summer before going to school. Like, that's traumatic. That'll throw a guy off. That will throw off a development track, you would think, for anyone. Like, that's just an awful, awful thing to experience. Of course, he wasn't himself for much of this season. Of course, he didn't get into the lineup until a little bit later on in the year. Only played 25 games for USC, limited to 19 minutes of action per game for a very bad USC team that had all kinds of problems. We've talked about it with Isaiah Collier and trying to evaluate him and the difficulty of evaluating a lead guard on a team that just like didn't have a whole lot to lead or guard. It was, it was tricky. The numbers not super impressive in those 19 minutes a game, just 4.8 points, 2.8 boards, 2.1 assists, a stock per game, shot just 27% on a pretty low volume of threes. The numbers suggest, like this guy is not an NBA player. Sure. I don't think you can just look at the numbers. You have to look at the actual guy, the athleticism, the on the court sort of movement and feel and tape and all that stuff to really get a gauge of Bronny James. The size, that's a thing that could be a concern, right? He's 6'2". That is a fact. He is 6'2" with about a 6'7" wingspan, 6'7" wingspan, I believe is the official combine metric that they came through with. He's obviously very athletic. I think this is one thing you just expect. Like, look who his dad is. Athleticism, somewhat genetic, one would think. His dad is LeBron James. Bronny James looks like an NBA player, athletically speaking. He moves like an NBA player. Like, I have no questions about that. That is one of the things he brings to the table. And when you're drafting later in the draft, betting on athleticism, not always the worst thing to do in the world. At 31, maybe a different story, but overall, like, you can do worse than just saying, hey, that guy's got some tools. Let's go see if we can mold those tools into a good player. I think, look, I'm not a shot doctor by any means. When you watch his 3-point stroke, when you watch his pull-up mid-range stroke, actually looks pretty good. Like, it looks tidy. It looks like mechanically sound and all of that. There's no weird hitch. This isn't a Devin Carter 3-point shot, which I'm not even saying Devin Carter's 3 is not going to hold up, but it's a bizarre looking jumper. That's not the case with Bronny James. His jump shot looks like a jump shot, which is nice. Of course, he's got to hit more than 27% of threes. That would be very important, of course, but I do think there's something there. I think really the thing that stands out with Bronny James to me are two things. One, he's probably going to be a pretty good defender for his size. Look, at 6'2" with a 6'7" wingspan, he's not going to scale up and guard 3s or 4s or anything like that, but guarding 1s and 2s, being like a sound point of attack guy, he seems to have a pretty good instinct for like hawking passing lanes and whatnot. Like, there's a good defender, an above average defender here in Bronny James. I think that's pretty clear based on watching what he does. I also think there is just like again, this is a thing where his dad is LeBron James. His dad is maybe the smartest player to ever play basketball. A guy who just like maps the floor in a way that very few people like this side of Nikola Jokic have ever been able to do. And that feels like maybe this is like, you can't actually like quantify this in any way, but if your dad is one of the most cerebral players who's ever lived and you've like spent your life watching him play basketball, playing basketball with him, talking to you and coaching you through it, like, there's got to be some feel for the game there with Bronny James. There's got to be some instinct built in that's pretty high for the game. And I do think that's a really interesting combination, like a high feel, connective, off guard type who can defend his ass off. That's a pretty interesting prospect. At 31, maybe not so much. I think that would be a bit of a stretch. If the Raptors were to trade back, there's that trade that I've kind of referenced here that I think Sam Vecini pitched on his like mock trade draft or whatever they did a couple of weeks ago in Game Theory. The idea of you trade back from 19 and 31, you get 24 and 25 from the Knicks as well as 38. That's the sort of the trade with New York that's kind of out there that could make sense just on paper. If you were to do something like that and 38's there and Bronny James is still on the board, then I think that's worthy enough. 31 is, I just think you're going to be in the conversation for guys who are bigger, who have similar defensive upside, guys who probably just project to be more safe floor NBA players than Bronny James just because of the size factor. And I think I would just rather go that way. But it's not like I think indefensible to say that in theory, a guy who's a high field connective player who can play good defense at the point of attack is worth the 31st pick when you take the name out of it. Obviously, the offense still has a ways to come with Bronny James. I think right now, mostly he's someone who operates in transition and kind of in the open floor. And he's going to be a guy who's not going to create for you very much. He's going to be someone who can attack when the ball swings to him, and he's got a tilted weak side defense coming back towards him. He can put it on the deck. He can put up a shot, whatever it is. Like, that's going to be his lot in life, probably in the NBA. And I don't really think he has a ton of like high upside creation juice. I don't think he's someone who's going to go out there and run 50 pick and rolls for you a game. That's going to be the world where Emmanuel Quickley and Scotty Barnes operate on this team. And I don't think Bronny James has the tools to go and really do that. Although that said, if you take Bronny James and he's on your team, he's probably a guy you just stick in the G League for a full year to get a full picture, a full season of him playing more developmental ball than he was able to at USC. You get a full idea of what he looks like off the ball, kind of running the similar system as the Raptors do. How does he fit into the scheme? What does his defense mean at the point of attack? Like, is he able to hold up in the G League there? Is he able to dominate the G League on defense? If he is, that's probably a good sign for the NBA. And then his offense, like, give him some on-ball reps, right? You get to see, put him through the progressions, put him through some lumps, see what we can actually do there. And you kind of get an answer for yourself of, okay, like, should we invest more in this track for him, or just kind of go with the like Patrick Beverley track where he is an off-ball guard who offers defense and intangibles and connectivity and all that stuff. You get that full year training ground of the G League to kind of get a feel for what Bronny James is going forward. I think that's a worthwhile thing to think about too. I think that really stands out. This was pointed out in the Floor and Ceiling, a really great YouTube channel, a Floor and Ceiling breakdown of Bronny James. And this was said like, and I quote, Bronny looks like a guy who's going to fit well in 0.5 offenses. A guy who can make quick decisions, who has a good understanding of the game and the reads and sort of what comes next in the sequence of the possession. That's a pretty interesting thing if you're looking for guys who can fit in. I know a lot of Raptors fans are out there lusting over DeAnthony Melton as an offseason addition. I'm not saying Bronny James is going to become DeAnthony Melton, but if you want to try to sort of get that type of player, an off-ball sort of undersized guard who leads with defense and maybe has some three-point shooting upside, like that, is something that you could do on the cheap with a Bronny James selection and not go and get DeAnthony Melton, even if there's no guarantee Bronny James ever becomes DeAnthony Melton or something close to it. I think, that type of player is an interesting guy to have, and every team can use someone like that, even if 6'2" is a bit of a tough size to deal with. I do think, Bronny James and Emmanuel Quickley could work in lineups together, like defensively. If Bronny James is able to take those big assignments, they're both pretty long for guards. Like that's viable. That can work. Like, I don't think it's crazy. Would I take him at 31 if I'm the Raptors? Probably not. I think there are just other guys there who I think I'd value more, but it's not the end of the world if the Raptors were to say, hey, we really believe in this guy. We believe in the son of LeBron James having some basketball upside to him. I don't think that's a crazy thing to go and believe. And I think if you believe in your ability to develop him along, which the Raptors feel like, they've always trusted themselves drafting. They've never been worried about drafting ahead of slot or anything like that. They trust their ability to develop guys. And if they view Bronny James as someone who's moldable, who can fit the way they want to play, who can be long-term guard depth for them to be a 7th or 8th man 2, 3, 4 years down the line. Like, if you get that with the 31st pick in the NBA draft, that's a good outcome. A second round pick turning into a 7th or 8th man who can play heavy minutes for you, or, spot starting a pinch, whatever. Like, that's an absolute score in the second round, no matter the pick. And so again, a lot has to happen. I think the offensive game has a long way to come for him to be super valuable on the offensive end and not just someone who stands in the corner and teams are happy to funnel shots to, especially if he's only a 27% three-point shooter. That feels more small sample-y and less indicative of what he'll actually be. I think the stroke and stuff, it's stuff of like a league average shooter in the modern NBA. I think he's got that in him at least. And if that's the case, like I don't think it's insane to go and draft Bronny James at 31. I'll have a full board of guys for 19 and 31 next week. We'll dig into. Bronny will not be at the top of it, but I don't think it's like an end of the world, lose your mind if it happens thing at 31, because he is like a real prospect. He is someone who has some moldability and some real reasons why this past season did not go especially well for him. That does not mean that has to tell the tale of his entire NBA career. He's like 19 years old. He's a very young guy. These things happen, and guys they still have upward trajectory, even if they've had bad things befall them early in the development stages. Like it's tough. It's tough to overcome, but I don't think it's insane. He's not a bad prospect. He's just maybe not my cup of tea or what the Raptors desperately need, which is guys who are taller than 6'2", notably. Either way, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thanks for rocking with the show this week. Apologies for the missed episode on Wednesday. We'll be back with a full slate of shows next week, of course. Probably some extra episodes in there with the draft and the 2-day draft and trades and all that stuff likely to break down over the course of the next 7 days or so. So we will have plenty of stuff for you here on the channel. Please follow, subscribe, rate, review on your audio app of choice. You can go to YouTube and support the show over there. It's much appreciated as well. And with that, we will send you off into your weekend. Thanks so much for hanging. Big board coming on Monday, and that'll be tons of fun. But in the meantime, enjoy the sweltering heat. Stay safe in the storms that keep on barreling down on Southern Ontario every single night, it seems. And have yourself a wonderful rest of your weekend. Thanks for hanging. Bye-bye.